Isn't that great to be reminded that nothing could ever change God's love for you? Because you think about a lot of things, right? That you think, man, I wonder if this kind of changed it, or that would change it, or when I do this, I disappoint myself, and I'm sure I disappoint God. Just to be reminded again that there's nothing that you could do. You know, we're wrapping up a message series today called Half of It. And the idea is that if you're not finding a place to serve, you're really only doing kind of half of this idea of following Jesus. But this appeal for you to find a place of service is not so that God will love you more. It's actually the flip. That if you begin to serve, what might happen? And maybe you might discover that you love God more because of the situations you find yourself in. And so as we wrap it up today, I'll take you back to a statement I made last week. I know some of you were out camping last week with our kids, and if you were last week, thank you on behalf of those parents, all right? You know, I know they appreciate it. You know, they just hope they didn't get a call like at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning or Sunday morning where, come get my kid, you know, that thing. So I hope that didn't happen. But hey, thanks. But here's what I said last week to you, and that was, you don't have a plan for serving. And the reality is, why would you? I mean, why would you have a plan for serving? I mean, you have a plan for lots of things in your life. Some of you have a plan for your retirement. Some of you have a plan for your kids' college, and so you begin working on that plan. Some of you have a financial plan to get out of debt or to save up in order to buy a house. We have plans for those kinds of things. Some of you have plans about your schooling. You know, what you're going to do when you get done with this level, and what's the next thing, and what do I have to do to get into that spot? Some of you have plans about your careers. You know, where you want to end up someday, and you know what you got to do now, but also what takes place. And some of you have plans about your relationships. So some of you have plans about, you know, how long you're going to date somebody, how long you're going to be engaged to somebody, not how long you're going to be married. That's a whole other, you know, that's a long thing. But you know, you have these plans about stuff, right? When we would have a kid, and when we would buy a house. You have all these plans. We have plans about so much stuff. Some of you have plans for this weekend. Some of you have plans for tonight. Some of you have plans for tomorrow. Some of them are very detailed about tomorrow. Some of you are praying for rain tomorrow, so that detail doesn't quite all work out, right? But we have plans for so many things, but we think to ourselves, why would I have a plan for serving? I mean, when somebody asks me to help, I'll decide at the moment if I should serve or if I can serve. You know, do I have the time? Do I have the energy? You know, is this a good thing? Or maybe next time? And we have all this stuff, and so why would I plan for that kind of piece? And the reason we ought to plan for that is actually what we're going to look at today. But before we get there, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray together, all right? Lord, it is overwhelming to think that there's nothing that will change your love of us. That there's nothing that would change your love of me. And for those of us in this room today or watching online today who have a hard time believing that. We have a hard time because we know who we are. We know what we've done. We know how much at times some of us struggle to even love ourselves. I would just ask today as we listen for you, and as we experience you in a little bit different way today, as we actually take a step and do an act later, I pray that you would honor those moves that we make today and use them to convince us of that one truth. That this is not us getting you to love us more. So much of this is about us finding ourselves in a place and putting ourselves in those places that we would love you more, that we would fall deeper and deeper in love with you, that we would somehow begin to understand just how crazy and deep and strong and unfailing your love is towards us. And so, Father, I just ask today as we turn back to this ancient document again and as we see an event from the life of Jesus, that again we not miss the reason that he took those steps on that evening. And while even today even today, when we take the same steps, that his message still rings true for us. So be here in this place with us now in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over in John chapter 13. John is recording what he remembers about the events of Jesus' life and his time spent with him. And last week, same situation, same story we looked at, just we're looking at it from John's perspective this week because he adds some details that weren't in the part we looked at last week. But here's the scene. The scene is that they're celebrating a Passover, and Jesus has said, I really wanted to celebrate this one particularly with you guys because he's done it every year for the last 3 years, but this one in particular because Jesus knows that this is the last time he's going to do that. That life's changing. Remember last week we talked about this big argument that breaks out about who's the greatest, and Jesus has to kind of remind of who really is the greatest in that room and what greatness looks like. But on this night, John records this scene, and he gives us a little bit of insight. He actually gives us this take of what Jesus is thinking at this moment as they're sitting down and as they're eating this meal, and at some point in the meal, Jesus has an epiphany, an aha moment. And it's not so much that Jesus learned something new at this moment. It's just that it seems like everything finally all falls in place, and he's known this, but for whatever reason, on this particular night, everything sort of just... And Jesus recognizes something. And he recognizes something in this room with these 12 guys that he has poured his heart and life and soul into for the last over 3 years. And he recognizes something else. In fact, if you were there in John 13, it begins by telling us, oh, by the way, Judas is one of those 12, and Judas has already decided that he's going to betray Jesus. So in the room that night is Judas and Jesus, and Jesus, it says, no, John tells us, knows that Judas has already made this deal. He's already set Jesus up. He's already set up a place when the religious leaders can arrest Jesus. That's outside of the public because if you arrest him in a public place, you might have a riot. And so he's already set up a private meeting that he'll get Jesus here, and then you guys show up and take him, and he sells out Jesus, and Judas is in that room that night. Also in this room that night is Peter, who just literally a few days before has vowed to Jesus that not only would he be with him to the end, that he would stand up and die for Jesus. That's what it takes. And we're told, John will record this story, and the others will as well, that Jesus knew that was a great statement, but was not always true. In fact, he knows that over the next few hours, Peter's going to go from this strong defender of Jesus to this guy who will deny Jesus. Not just being mean, silent, and shrinking away, but literally by saying, I don't know him. In fact, it will get to the point where Peter is so afraid of being associated with Jesus that he will flip back to his fisherman days and use the language of a fisherman, as he literally will swear and curse to show that he is not any part of this whole religious thing going on. But it's not just the betrayer and the denier that are in this room. It's also 10 other guys. 10 other guys who will leave Jesus in his greatest hour of need on this planet. And that's important to know the context as Jesus has this aha moment, because he knows here's the betrayer, here's the denier, and here's this group of cowards. And at this moment, here's what John tells us this aha moment for Jesus is. He says, Jesus knew that the Father had placed everything into his hands. Now, I think Jesus knew this, but it's something that happened that night that all of a sudden it dawns on him the weight of that statement. That everything has been placed in his hand, that he has all authority, that he has all power. And, John goes on, that he had come from God and that he was going back to God, that all these pieces were coming together, that he knew this was sort of the end here, but just not the end here, but this was a moment. And John seems to tell us that what dawns on Jesus is that Jesus recognizes that he is the most powerful person in the room at that moment. And not just in that room, but in the world, in fact, everywhere. And this dawns on Jesus that he is the most powerful person in the room. And here's the question we need to ask ourselves. What do you do when you find yourself as the most powerful person in the room? Because some of you have had those moments, maybe once, a couple of times in life, where you've discovered, whoa, I have a lot of power right at this moment. Some of you, that's a weekly basis because the jobs you work, the companies you work in or work for or that you own. And you recognize what comes to that whole idea of being the most powerful person in the room at that moment. And Jesus, as he thinks about that, when it all kind of comes together, that here he is with this group of 12 guys that, again, that he has poured everything into. And he knows what's going to take place. Here's what John records that he does. And I'll read this like I think I would read it if I was the most powerful person in the room. And I knew what was going on. I knew there was a denier here. I knew there was a betrayer here. I knew there was a bunch of cowards here. So during the meal, Jesus stood up and he took off his outer clothing. I mean, right? You ever been in one of those moments? What do you do? You know, when it kind of comes to that moment and everybody's finally recognized that you've been telling the right thing, you've had the right plan the whole time, and they're all coming to that idea now, and it's your moment to kind of straighten things out. That finally you get in that position where you can get everything right. That's always been all wrong. That finally you're the one they count on to get things reorganized, to set the vision, to set the direction. Jesus stands up, rips off his outer garment. He takes a towel. He wraps it around his waist. He begins to pour water into a basin, and it says he begins to wash his followers, that his disciples' feet. And he dries them with a towel. Let's be a little honest this morning. Is that really what you would do in that situation? Would you really be serving them, or would you be simply serving them up? Calling them out. Because I know what you're going to do, and I know for all your great talk, this is what you're going to do. The rest of you bunch of knuckleheads are going to leave me. But at the moment when Jesus recognizes, and it all comes together for him, that he's the most powerful person, not just in this room, but he is the most powerful person, he bends down and begins to wash these guys' feet. And this, again, is halfway through the meal. There's been a lot of discussion of what Jesus meant by this and what he was trying to communicate to the disciples. Some have thought that he's sort of shaming them, that he's doing for what they should have done, and they're trying to make them feel bad, that they hadn't got stuff planned. Because the reality, this is a really dirty job. I ought to make that TV show, Dirty Jobs. This one ought to be on there, you know. Because this isn't like we do feet washing today. If you're not familiar with us as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we, on a day like today, offer people a chance to wash each other's feet. And it's kind of weird. The first time you do it, you kind of think, this is kind of, whoa, what are you doing? And it's uncomfortable because whoever washes somebody's feet in our context, that's not a normal thing, you know. But you kind of do it, because it's sort of this idea of following what Jesus did. But you need to understand, if you sort of feel that way, that's exactly what these guys felt. As Jesus goes around that group and he's washing their feet, but their feet are much different from the feet that you might wash today. Because their feet hadn't had a bath or a shower this morning or last night, or at least hopefully sometime this past week. You're sitting closer than I am to somebody, so, right? These were people that lived in sandals, if they had sandals, that walked lots of miles through dirt and all the other things that fall on dirt. Stuff that's thrown out, the waste from the table and the waste that comes out of somebody who's eating at the table. I mean, their feet are bad, Caesar. I mean, they're caked, they're crusty, they're cracked. They have the odor of something that has not been washed in a long time. In fact, the Jews would hire a Gentile to do this job because it was such a tough and dirty job. They would hire one of those people to do it because every group has one of those people for them. Because nobody wanted to put themselves in that place of that, because it was just not just a job that somebody had to do. It was a bad job that nobody wanted to do. And Jesus moves around the circle. If you're familiar with the story, he washes their feet. And then as he gets done, he puts on his clothes and he goes back and he sits down at the table and he asks this question. Do you understand do you understand what I have done to you or for you? And I don't know if he looked specifically at Judas when he asked this question. Do you understand what I've done for you, knowing that you've already set this deal, that you're already selling me out? That this is just a little matter of maybe even minutes at this moment. I don't know if he looks at Peter. Well, all Peter's bravado and all Peter's kind of response to all this and asks him the same question, looks directly and says, do you understand what I've done for you? But the crazy thing is John remembers this story and writes it down so that we have a chance to remember it today. Is that nobody stands up and says, I understand. Not even Peter. Which I'm sure all the other disciples wish Peter at this moment would have, right? But they've been around Jesus now for over 3 years. They know that when Jesus asks some of these questions, it's better just to be silent because a guess is not going to make you look good. Do you understand what I've done for you? Washed my feet. Made me feel bad because you shouldn't have to do that. Somebody else should have been somebody else's job. Because where they would have gone, they would have missed the whole reason of what Jesus did. When he says, do you understand what I've done for you? This is more than just washing their feet. This is more than just filling a job that nobody else wanted to do. Notice how he goes on. See, this is not about whose place it is to do it, but who would do it. Jesus is talking about something greater and something bigger that sometimes falls through the cracks for us. And he says to them, you call me teacher? That is rabbi in the original language. Jesus would have had these robes that he'd taken off, would have been rabbi robes. So when he walked into town, everybody thought, oh, this is a great teacher, sort of this kind of calling card, no billboards back then. Hey, I see this guy dressed like this. He's got to be a teacher. You call me a rabbi? You call me Lord with a big L. And you're right. And you shouldn't forget that. Not only am I a teacher and Lord, that I am teacher, capital T, and Lord, capital L. Because that is what I am. I want you to understand this. I am that. But I also want you to understand why I did this. But here it is. If your Lord and your teacher has washed your feet, you also should wash each other's feet. Which, by the way, is not an invitation for us today to wash each other's feet. We hopefully wash each other's feet as a reminder of something deeper and greater. Because Jesus is not talking about the specific act of washing feet. He's talking about something greater, something deeper, something that he really wants them to understand. I did this. I'm the one that got down there. I'm the one that washed and got and smelled and all that kind of stuff and had to keep dumping out the water because of what it looked like. I did this as an example, a pattern, so that you should do as I have done for you. And guys, this is about more than washing somebody's feet. I don't want you every time you're together to fight over, oh, I get to be like Jesus today and wash the feet. That's not the point here. I tell you the truth, because this is why I've done it. A servant is not greater than his master. You're not better than me. A messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. And then he caps it off with this. That Jesus' call to them is not as simply of doing this act to kind of remember what he did. It's about how we live our lives. And here's my question. What if the goal isn't to be on the receiving end? Because let's be honest, it is nice to be on the receiving end, isn't it? How many of you ever gone on a cruise? Say how many people cruisers here? Okay. How many of you, when you've gone on a cruise, have been embarrassed by the kind of service you get? Anybody gone on a really nice line? Oh, we had a couple, all right. I made the mistake. I've been only a handful of cruises in my life, but the first one I went on one of the really good ships, which makes all the other ships look really bad about, even though they do good service, it's not quite the same. But when you sit down at the table, Brian, and they pull out the chair for you as a guy. It's like, whoa, do it for her, but I'm okay. I got my own chair, right? But no, sit down, and you reach for the napkin, and the guy gets over there and he grabs the napkin before you and flops it out, lays it in your lap, And if the first night you order lemonade, you know what you have at the table the second night when you get there? That's right. And if you order extra hot fudge for every dessert because you just kind of like hot fudge, every night at dessert, bam, they bring out extra hot fudge. And they not just kind of wipe off the breadcrumbs, but they have this little thing that's a breadcrumb broom. You ever seen this? How many have seen a breadcrumb broom? They go, they get all the breadcrumbs off between each service. Every time you leave your room, you come back in and it's made up. Some of you wish you had that around your house. Every time you walk out of your bedroom, you can just close the door, open it back up, and it'd be made up again, right? But there's a level, for me, there was a level that it's kind of like, this just feels wrong. Because it's so over and above and outside. But there's something about that sometimes. Sometimes we like going. Some of us may say, I don't want to go all the time, but it's nice to kind of go out to the big, kind of a big gala event where you got to get all dressed up, because some of us like getting dressed up and eat those little foods that come by. And if you really like him, you have to watch where the guy comes out so you can get it before everybody else, and you have this kind of great idea or this great restaurant, or kind of vacation experiences. And there's something that begins to tell us, and our culture feeds in this idea that, really who the greatest person, really the whole point of life is getting yourself to the place where those moments when you say, and I could get used to this, actually is how life works. Because these guys had hoped that was going to be the case. They had hoped by being close to Jesus. That's why they kept fighting over who was the greatest and who was the closest to Jesus. Because when he came into power, baby, I'm right there with you, Jesus. We'll be running the show. We're tired of having to be kind of low on the food chain. We're tired of having these Romans around here running our government. We're about ready to get things back to how they ought to be. Back to when David was around. What if? What if the goal for you and for me isn't to be on the receiving end? What if Jesus thinks you have a more important reason in life? What if the goal and purpose of our life is not getting that place of luxury or contentment or find ourselves in this really great spot? What if there's a greater and bigger person behind it? Because Jesus, as he tells this group of guys that night, again, this betrayer, this denier, these cowards, these people that would run out on him, he tells them, do you understand what I've done for you? You have a greater purpose than being the one who gets served. You have a greater purpose than being mini-me's. Because when I leave, you're all, the temptation's going to be, hey, I got to be Lord today. I got to be great teacher today. Who's going to step up and take Jesus' place? And John, as he kind of wraps this scene up, says that Jesus said these words. If you know these things, if you've gotten the idea that this is not just me about fulfilling the role of a servant, this is about me being who I am and who I hope you'll be. Somebody who does because they can, not because they have to, not because it's their job, not because it'll make them look weak. But if you understand this, there's something that will happen. Part of our idea of the staff is that one of the reasons we want to give you multiple opportunities to serve, sometimes short, sometimes longer time things, is that in serving, lives get changed. Your life gets changed. The person you're serving, if you do it right, their life gets changed. And even the people who observe you serving, their lives get changed. And isn't that really what this is all about? It's not about position or power or getting to this place where I feel like finally everything's kind of done. Isn't it sort of getting to that place of saying, my life's been changed? And it was changed because of this, and because of that, and because of lots of different things. Here's the question I think we all need to ask, and I think the question Jesus was driving this group of 12 guys that night to. And that's simply this, that what's the need and how do I meet it? What's the need and how do I meet it? Not what's the need and who I need to hire, what's the need and who do I need to direct to take care of it, what's the need and whose job it is, but what's the need and how do I meet it? You know, sometimes I used to do a lot of, years ago, this thing called spiritual gifts training. I don't do much of it anymore because I think there's better ways to discover what your spiritual gifts are. But sometimes you go through this class, you have people, Marty, you got people, take a little quiz, you come out at the end. If somebody doesn't have any clue what they are, everybody says you have the gift of hospitality because you're a nice person, so we kind of categorize that. But one thing I remember, I always tell folks, I would say, while you may have a spiritual gift in something, that is not your total calling. Because if you have the gift of encouragement and somebody falls down, your job is not to say, oh, come on, you can do it, get up, get up, get up. Your job is to help them get up. And I think for us, sometimes it's easy to miss that, to miss the whole mark. And here's the other questions that come with it. How can it be a positive and not a negative? Because let's be honest, some of us in this room, we're a little negative. And the only way, I've told you before, I am by nature a cynical, sarcastic pessimist. I'm a great guy to have around. That's my natural wiring. But by the grace of God, my life has changed over the course of the 30-plus years that I've experienced life with Him. And I'm not where I want to be, but I'm thankful I'm not where I used to be. But the great thing about this is that I've learned that the way I change from negative to a positive is I have to make a decision and a choice as those thoughts come into my mind to say, Mike, just keep that shut. Go this way, look at the positive there. So how can I be a positive, not negative? How can I add and not simply take? Because there's some of you in this room today that's hoping that at some point I'm going to say something about those of you who feel like you just give and you serve and serve and serve, and nobody seems to give a hoot. But how can I add and not simply take? See, here's the reality. That was the lesson from that night that Jesus spent with this guy who was had already set him up, already sold him out, was just waiting for the moment. This betrayer. That was the message Jesus had for the guy who talked a great game and a big game. But Jesus knew better. And Jesus knew when the moment came, he was going to keep taking step and step and step back away from Jesus. That was the message Jesus had for this other group of 10 guys who, again, would find themselves as cowards at heart. That would not be there at his greatest need at that moment. But tied to that message was not Jesus that night looking at these guys going, you're going to mess it, This was not about how Jesus looked at them and said, I want you not to forget this night. Because it's not just going to be this night, it's about what this night turns into. And in just a few hours, I will hang on a cross. And I will die. I'll die for your betrayal. I will die for your denial. I will die for your cowardice. And this was not about them understanding that Jesus was shaming them to his spot. This is about Jesus saying, guys, I'm just trying to help you understand, you are not greater than me. And I'm not saying that out of a position of power. I'm saying out of a realization that I'm the most powerful person in the room. But the most powerful person in the room is the same person he was before and after he came to this recognition. The most powerful person in the room, all he ever does is to serve. And I am glad to have washed your feet because you needed it. And the reality is, all of us today need some washing, need some cleansing, need some refreshing. So I'm going to ask you to say these words a few times with me, all right? And this is not a statement of shame or a statement, a reminder of your place. This is simply a reminder of his place. I am not greater than Jesus. I am not greater than Jesus. And I am thankful for that. Because I need somebody greater than me, and I'm guessing you do as well. Because the reality is, in your life, there are probably some tensions. There are probably some moments that have happened this past week that are going to happen this coming week, may happen this weekend. And in those moments, you're going to be called on to make some kind of decision because you're going to be looked at for the answer. You're going to be looked at as the one who's the most powerful at that moment. And the question we leave here today with is, what will I do when that is my moment? Will I take that moment and use it to push myself even to greater strength, to greater power? Or will I do what Jesus invited me to do? To do the same thing he did. To flip the tables and to simply serve them. To ask what they need and to do it. It's our chance to remind ourselves again that we're not greater than Jesus and to celebrate that. Celebrate the fact that he is great enough not only to die, but to come back to life, to die not just for what he had in his life, but to die for all of our sins. To carry the weight of yours and mine on his shoulders. And so in just a few moments, in fact, some deacons will be in the back, I think. Derwin, raise your hand and kind of wave towards me, Derwin. Go like this. Everybody see Derwin? Everybody turn around, look at Derwin. Hey, Derwin. All right. So as we do, we're going to release from the back. People come down the outside aisle, go back the inside aisle, all the way down to the front. Have a chance to get a little piece of unleavened bread, a little piece of grape juice up here to have a chance to celebrate again that I'm not greater than Jesus. As we do that, we're going to sing together, and we'll kind of move. So, Derwin, you want to go ahead and start in the back? And by the way, we as Seventh-day Adventist Christians celebrate what we call open communion, which simply means if you need Jesus today in your life, you're more welcome to participate, all right? Because we think everybody ought to have the chance to come and to invite Jesus in their life, all right?